Now in this video we're going to look at a better way to output and inspect and do things with information that we have on the page. Now because JavaScript is works client side, we can actually access things client side from the browser, and we can also use a better way of actually logging information, and that is to the console. Now we've already seen the inspect element in Chrome, and we've looked at the dev tools. So we've seen this sort of element here that sort of bundles with Chrome. We can go ahead and inspect items on the page, elements on the page, look at the network tab to see our external JavaScript resources being loaded in. However, there is a more useful way of dealing with this when we work with JavaScript or dealing with our code. So let's go ahead and just write some on-page code with some script tags. We won't bother using an external script for now. Now, let's just say I create a variable called name, and I'm going to call this Alex. So this is a string value here. Now what happens if I am on a page like this, and I somehow need to know what value this holds? Now at the moment I can obviously see what value this holds. I know what value name is. However, if this was something that was unknown, being a variable that can change, I might want to go ahead and log this value to the console. And instead of using an alert box, which is incredibly annoying when you're trying to develop a JavaScript application, you don't always want synchronous alert boxes popping up and blocking the next thing from running. So what you can do is, instead of using alert name, you can use console.log and then whatever you want to log, whether it be a string, a boolean, an integer, any variable, or any string that you just want to directly pass to it. You can even pass arrays and objects, which we'll be looking at later. Now when I go ahead and refresh the page now, you can see that this code's updated, but if I head over to this console tab, you can see that this value has been output. So we know that this value is Alex now because we've output it to the console. What we can also do is we can choose this little button down here, which we can show the console as well as our code. So we can be looking at things and also keeping an eye on the console as well. Now the other useful thing about this is, if for example this was a prompt, and I was to type in, "Are you sure?" When I go ahead and refresh, oh, sorry, not a prompt, a confirm, "Are you sure?" and I hit OK, you can see here that we've logged true to the console, and when I click cancel, you can see that we've logged false to the console. So we can do this kind of thing. We don't need to use alert boxes or anything like that. Now let's get away from this example and let's look at an example. For example, let's create two numbers. So number equals 5 and number, we'll say number 1, number 2 equals 10. Now what we can do is, we've got these variables, they're within the browser. The browsers now store these as global variables. So we'll be talking about global variables and everything like that a bit later. But if we have these two variables here, we can actually manipulate them using the console. You know, they're not set in stone. We can manipulate these using the console. Let's say I just want to get the value of number 1. I can go ahead and just type in number 1, and you can see that we got a bit of an autocomplete there. So whenever I type number 1 and hit enter, that gives me the value of number 1. I can do exactly the same with number 2, and it gives me the value of number 2, so 10. What I can also do is I could say number 1 plus number 2, and that gives me the operation. So it tells me that number 1 and number 2 added together is 15. I can do exactly the same with minus, which will give me -5. I can do the same with times if I want, and I can even do the same with divide. I could even concatenate them together. So I could say number 1 plus string plus number 2 is 5 and 10, and that gives me a string value back because I've concatenated it with a string. So we can do anything we want within the console, and we can actually manipulate and see items that we sort of have within our code, and we can play around with them here. What I could also do is I could say number 1 equals 10, which gives me back 10. It's sort of confirming that that value is now 10. Then I could say number 1 plus number 2. Now what do you think the answer will be here? I've changed number 1 to 10, so I've done that sort of on the fly dynamically. So now we have number 1 equal to 10, number 2 equal to 10, and that will give me 20. So until the page is refreshed, number 1 and number 2 are 10. Now they've changed back to 5 and 10 because I've basically run the code that's already on the page again. Now we can use the console to write any JavaScript code we want, as complex as we want or as simple as we want. So this is very, very simple stuff, but it's really good to know that the console's there to manipulate values on the page. We can log to the console if we need to see particular values within our code. We can inspect arrays, we can inspect objects, we can do whatever we want with the console. It allows us to really get an insight into our code and see what we want to do and manipulate things. We can even go ahead and create variables on the fly. So for example, I could say number 1 equals 24, and then I can say var name equals Alex. Now I have a variable called Alex. They're like this, so not var. Name equals Alex. Now I can say console.log. Well, I don't really need to say console.log, but I could say name is number 1. What that will do is it will now use the variable that I created and the variable that I changed to create a string, and now it says Alex is 24. So logging to the console is a really, really useful way of doing whatever you want in JavaScript and sort of seeing what you want to see. So I could even say here result equals number 1 plus number 2, and I can go ahead, refresh the page, and I could say result, which will give me the result, or I can go ahead and do that within my code, and I can say console.log result, which will automatically, when I refresh the page, log that out to me. So instead of using alerts to go through and debug your code and look at what values are what, use the console, play around with the console. Don't be afraid to mess anything up, because at the end of the day, you can just refresh the page and start again.